So first question I'll start with, and I like this question. You maybe have heard me answer it to some degree before, but the question was, why did I become a therapist? And I think about that question, and I was actually thinking, I think it's changed over time in some ways for me. I think what I might have told you at the beginning might be a little different now, just because I've grown a little bit. But I think initially when I became a therapist, there were really two primary reasons I became a therapist. The first one was to help people. I had just had some experiences where I worked with people who were really struggling, and I saw that one positive or healthy decision could literally make a huge impact in their life. And so that for me was really attractive to how do I help people make that one decision and change their whole life from that one decision. And so that was part of the reason I got into that, is to learn how to do that better. And then I always tell people the second reason is kind of selfish. I have gone to therapy basically my whole life. And so along the way, I kept finding myself being curious about it and interested in getting better and learning about healthier relationships. And so, yes, I'm going to save this. And so along the way, it just sort of made sense. And it was kind of selfish in the sense that I really benefited from it. I mean, I wouldn't be the same guy today if I didn't have this profession, because basically I get to learn about healthy relationships and people and what works and what doesn't work. And so it's been something I've really benefited from too. So that's to answer that question. Let's jump into some of the other ones. Okay, here's a question. I am dealing with persistent anxiety and intrusive thoughts. What do I do? So I don't know if you ever had this, but it is not fun. It's when we're kind of just obsessing about a thought or an idea. And so first thing I'm going to tell you, just clinically speaking, is we need to rule out that there's actually significant anxiety taking place and that we don't need some sort of medical intervention or medication to help with that, because sometimes that is the case. We're really dealing with something that's physiological and brain, and so we need to deal with that. But if this is something more of, this is something I'm experiencing now, and I want some just kind of practical ways to deal with it, one of the things is to kind of walk that anxiety out. So what am I anxious about? And about that, is there any sort of part of that makes sense, right? So I am anxious about doing an Instagram Live today. And why am I anxious about that? Well, let's see, I might drop the phone, or I might say something stupid, or whatever those things are. Where I would start is that actually possible? And as you see, yeah, that's going to be possible. I very well might say something stupid by the end of this. So first of all, is our anxiety rooted in some truth? Now, maybe it's not all true, but is there some truth to that? And if so, okay, great. Yeah, that makes sense. You might say something really dumb or make a mistake or burp talk, or I don't know what else you could do, but you might do it. And so if we know there's some truth to that and legitimacy, then we know that it's a kind of our brain's way of helping us out, right? Because our brain's saying, hey, I want to help you avoid pain. I want to help you avoid, looking bad or feeling bad. And so this is what I'm going to tell you to worry about. So we just kind of say yeah, that makes sense. And then we start to walk out, where would that lead us? So let's say I totally blew it today, and you guys all message me and you're like, oh man, you really screwed that up. Then what would happen? Well, that'd just sort of be a bummer of a day, but I don't know that it would change my whole life, or I don't know that it would end anything for me. It'd just be a rough day. And then what would I do if that happened? Well, I'd just probably come back tomorrow and say hey, sorry about that. I'm going to try again. So sometimes dealing with the anxiety is just trying to decide, is there legitimacy to this? If there is, what is that about? Accepting that, and then walking through the kind of the what if, because the what if is usually where we get really hooked on and obsessive about, is the what if. So then walk out the what if, what if? And if it is really, really bad, then maybe our anxiety is telling us something for good reason, right? If it's I'm going to run blindfold across a busy street and we're really anxious about that, maybe we should pay attention to it. And so sometimes what I'll see is people are really, really anxious about something they should be anxious about, and is actually a pretty important message, and they're more focused on getting rid of the thoughts than the message of the anxiety. And so just know, not all anxiety is bad. I'm a firm believer that some of that is very helpful to us. We just have to discern kind of what that's about. And then when we practice acceptance, then we just let this stuff go, right? So we say, okay, so I am having anxiety, and then we let that float on by. Because otherwise what we do is we get hooked on that, and we get hooked on it, we just it's like a conveyor belt in our head of thoughts. And so on that conveyor belt are depressive thoughts, anxious thoughts, happy thoughts, sad thoughts, the whole myriad of thoughts. But when we have anxiety, what we tend to do is take all the anxious thoughts off, and then we stop the conveyor belt and look at them. And so the trick is just to kind of visualize letting that conveyor belt keep going and letting those anxious thoughts go by. They're okay. It's okay to have anxious thoughts. I don't need to take a look at every single one that comes by. It's okay. They're on the conveyor belt. That's not my job. So that would be my short answer for that. Let's see, next question. What is the most important thing or things in life you've learned personally and as a therapist? This is great. One of the first things I learned is that insight isn't enough. And what I mean by this is that for a long time in my life, I knew like all the things that were wrong or all the things that I did wrong or didn't know. Like I was aware, I had insight about that. But just simply having insight doesn't actually change anything. It helps us be more aware. Sometimes it even fuels like guilt and shame, but it doesn't actually change us. The action changes us. And so one of the things I've tried to do clinically as a result of learning this is not only get people insight, because I think it's important to have insight, but also to pair that with action. Because again, if I just give you insight, I say like, hey, just heads up, like everything you're doing right now is wrong and bad and not going to be helpful for a healthy relationship. Okay, like that's cool to know, but that actually just makes me feel terrible, right? And so what we need instead is, hey, this is true, and this is kind of your ladder out. This is how you could take a step towards better. So that's one lesson. Let's see, everybody is lovable. This was a lesson that I needed to learn because I definitely had some thoughts about people who were maybe not going to be lovable. And early on, I worked with people who'd been through the prison system, and I was just certain that I was going to meet people who were definitely not lovable. And, along the way, what happened is that I learned in that process that I actually had some things in common with them, and that we were just all humans. And learning that we were just all humans made me realize like we're all in fact lovable. We all express things differently, and some people do things that I would never do, or that I can't understand why they did it that way, but I can always connect with the function of it, right? So you want to be in connection, and people express that differently. In some ways is really hurtful, but I could always kind of connect with that desire to be connected or be loved. And so, yeah, people are lovable. That's another one. And then also just people have way more potential than we think. We are often very, very limiting in what we think we're able to do. And as a result, we don't do a whole lot sometimes because we just play it safe. And I think actually you would be shocked if you really applied yourself to a goal, because most of us can do way more than we think we can. And even when we run to the end, it's usually farther past what we thought than where we accurately predicted. So that's what I've learned. Okay, moving on. What are the key steps to rebuild from a betrayal? Can they keep their privacy? So this is a great question. One of the things that I specialize in and have some certification is I've got a master's in addiction along with counseling, and then also help people working through problems with infidelity and pornography and that sort of thing. So I know a little bit about this area, and that's to say I know quite a bit about this area, but the key steps to rebuild from betrayal are that first, the person has to take ownership. If the person's unwilling to take ownership, we're stuck right there. So the first thing is the person takes ownership, takes responsibility, is able to provide some empathy and validation in your pain, and then is willing to do something about it. Now, oftentimes what happens is that the person who is the betrayer, they say they're sorry. They do that. They acknowledge that part, but they often say they're sorry and then they want to just move on. And the reason is because it feels really bad to hurt somebody. I don't know if you ever hurt somebody really badly, but that is not like a fun spot to sit in. And so oftentimes when we hurt someone really badly, we betray them with infidelity, what then happens is we try to get them to just move on. And the problem with that is they can't, because it really, really hurts. And so you have known about your behavior the whole time. They haven't. So it's news to them. And then the most destructive thing we can do is kind of try to drag them on and just say like, hey, this doesn't matter. It actually shouldn't hurt. So that is the thing we don't want to do. So some of those steps are take ownership, be willing to work on it and to actually make change, invest in trust and building trust again, which is a process, and a willingness to recognize that the process is going to take probably 2 to 3 times longer than they thought. And I'll tell you, when I tell people that, no one ever smiles, right? When I'm like, hey, how long do you think it'll take them to get over this? And they're like, well, I don't know, a week or 2. And I'm like, cool. That's gonna be like months or a year or something. No one is happy to hear that, but it's also true. It takes a while. And so understanding that is really important. As far as the privacy question, does a person get to keep their privacy? Yeah, I mean, I think we got to be a little careful with that because that's a big question. I don't know exactly what this person is asking about in terms of betrayal, but I think some things like if we're looking at internet pornography or we're doing things like that, that may be something that our partner checks on, or we show that to them to help build trust. So I think eventually we want to have, maybe our own belief that we can handle that, but initially we might have to have some boundaries around things, and privacy might be a little bit compromised initially to help build some of that trust. Again, very fine line. I don't want to take a bunch of people off because it honestly is kind of specific to each situation. But I'm just going to say, when we have betrayed people, we need to do the work to rebuild that trust. Okay. Does the type of entertainment people watch contribute to anxiety and depression? Yeah, totally. Yeah, because it's kind of like if you hang out around a certain group of people that have beliefs and say and do things like that, eventually kind of rubs off on you, and media is very much the same. So I know for me, I watched Ozark for a while, and then I wanted to be an accountant, and I thought about joining the mob and moving to the Ozarks. And I'm just kidding about that, but what I'm saying is, it totally affects us. And to be really honest about that show in particular, I did watch it, and it super depressed me because after a long day of working with people, that was not helpful for me to have that on top of it. And so sometimes we have to step away from things that are entertaining because they're not actually helpful to our mood or where we're at with our health. Okay, let's see. And I see questions going through, and I'm going to try to answer some of those too as we go, but I've got a number of these highlighted that I'm going to cover first. Someone asked me, what advice would you give to a younger unmarried you? So here's what I would say to younger unmarried Jason. No one likes your faux hawk. Hey, it's not a good look. You probably, that's not cool. And the eyebrow piercing is not actually neat either. So I would tell my younger self that would have saved me a lot of time and trouble. I would have also said it's okay to not have any idea what you're doing, but you need to ask for help. And then lastly, it's okay to be afraid, because I spent a lot of my life really afraid of taking risk and of doing things and being in a relationship, and it cost me a lot. And so I think I would tell my younger self, it makes sense to be afraid, but that shouldn't call the shots in your life. So those are just three things. And if you have an eyebrow piercing or a faux hawk, maybe it looks beautiful on you, just was not a good look for me. Trust me, was not awesome. Okay, next question. Is your attachment style considered trauma response? Short answer, yes. In some ways it can be. If we think about dismissive, avoidant, or disorganized, those are definitely trauma responses. And so that's where that comes from. Because again, we're kind of taught as kids how to behave and how the world works in close relationship with others. And so those attachment styles can be trauma responses. And interestingly, once we do the work on the trauma and that wound, oftentimes the attachment style is less of a barrier to the relationship we want. It doesn't necessarily stop it altogether, but it is less of a barrier or obstacle. Someone then asked, how do I stop negative thoughts? And that's, again, kind of going back to the anxiety question. It's a similar thing to make kind of peace with the fact that we're going to have some negative thoughts. That's going to be part of the deal, and sometimes they're accurate. And that's okay. Sometimes I'll just remind myself of what's true. So if I have a negative thought, or I'll look back and say hey, I wouldn't have answered that question that way. And what are you doing? You don't know how to talk to people. Or I might just say is that actually accurate? And is that accurate in this situation, or is it accurate in all situations? Because when we're negative with ourselves, we have this tendency to kind of generalize one thing into everything. And then this one negative thing we did becomes about our character and our personality, when the truth is it's just that one negative thing. So I think if you're in that space, one, kind of track that back to what is that really about? And then sort that out a little bit and just ask also, is this helpful for me right now? Telling myself I suck, is that a helpful thing for me to be telling myself every day? Yes or no? Probably not. What might be more helpful instead? Okay, when newly dating, at what point do I mention that I had an illness or a serious illness? And I would say with this, it would be when they are a trusted person in your life. It's a little difficult to put an exact time on it, but I think we all have kind of these circles in our life of trust and vulnerability. And so some people are going to be right in the middle, right? They're going to be the people that we could tell anything to. And then there's going to be another circle where we tell, most things, and another circle, another circle, another circle. And so I think when we're dating, we kind of got to size up the other person a little bit and say, are they kind of in the circle of the person I would tell that to? Meaning, can I tell them this and trust that they're going to be, kind with the response, or that they can handle that, or that they have the maturity to talk with me about that? And so, interestingly, you might find that early on with a person, or it might take a while sometimes to kind of discern which person they are for you. But once you do, I think if it's meaningful for you and it's played a large role in your life, that is something you should talk to people about. How do I overcome the fear of ending a relationship? I think it's always going to be scary. If it wasn't scary, that'd be kind of weird, right? If you said, hey, Jason, here's the deal. Like, I'm never afraid of ending a relationship, I'd go, I guess you probably ended a lot of relationships. So I think first is just saying, like, yeah, actually that kind of makes sense. I think I'd be scared too. And then what I would tell you is to do what I do with anything that's scary, is I just break it into little steps. I think just immediately ending a relationship is terrifying, and most people don't do it well because they don't have the ability to kind of practice good self-care and to maintain boundaries during that time. And so we want to kind of incrementally step that towards the end of the relationship. And so what that might look like is just increasing boundaries until that relationship's over, rather than just demanding that it be done at that exact moment, because oftentimes that is a response to something, or it's a reaction rather than an intentional decision. Maybe it's something you've been kind of contemplating, but that reactivity is often leading to us to regret. And so reactivity to regret, that's what we want to avoid. Okay, a work question, and I love work questions because some of what I get to do sometimes is work with companies and organizations about how we make their place a better place to work, and how we help people get along better in relationships at work. And so this person said, I've been asked to do some tasks not assigned to me. How do I say no without hurting my position? And this is kind of tricky, and it's tricky too if you're a people pleaser, right? Because as people pleasers, I think we want to say, I'll totally do that. What do you want me to do? I'll do anything you want me to do. But that's not actually awesome, so don't do that. But I think what I'm always trying to go back to with organizations, with clients, with people I'm working with is, what is it we're trying to do here, and what are the expectations, okay? And so if you hired me to do this, and these are the expectations, if you want to change them, that might be okay, but we gotta have a conversation about that. So I'm okay maybe with that, but you gotta tell me you're changing expectations, and then we have to be in agreement that they changed. And if we're not, then the trouble is we now have a relationship that's really confusing and it's uncertain, and I'm not sure when I've crossed lines or when you've crossed lines. And so I guess what I would tell you is just to say, hey, it sounds like you guys are looking for me to do some stuff that maybe wasn't in my original description. I guess I'm curious, are we changing the description, or are there different expectations now? And if so, what are those? And then you get to kind of figure out, like, if you agree to that or not. And maybe you say, no way, like, I'm not going to do that. Or maybe you go, yeah, that's actually not a bad deal. I agree to it, but I want to be on the same page, and hopefully your organization feels the same. So that's how I answer that. I want to go back and answer some other questions here that I've had a couple of times from people that I made a note to get to. Someone said, please talk to me about imposter syndrome and how to heal it. Man, I think I have felt like an imposter at times in my life, and so I understand that, where you have an opportunity and you don't feel like you deserve it, or you feel like people are definitely going to figure out that you're not qualified. And that's not a great feeling. It robs you of joy and celebration in those moments where you actually are doing something pretty cool. I remember, just as I've started to build the speaking career and doing stuff like this, I have felt so much like I don't have anything to talk about, like I am not qualified to talk about it, and that people are going to figure it out. Like somewhere along the line, they're going to figure this stuff out, that I'm a fraud. I don't actually know. And here's what's true though. So this is how you do this, is what's true is actually I have a ton of education. I've got a lot of life experience, got a lot of professional experience. And so what I have to do in those moments is remind myself of what's true, because that is a feeling, right? And that feeling is important, but the fact is also very important. And so in that moment, I try to go back to, but what is actually true? And when we look at what is actually true, oftentimes it changes our perspective. The other thing is just to note that, because oftentimes what that is just simply discomfort. And I'm a person who believes that most of the good things in our life that we really want, or our audacious goals, they involve discomfort. And so for some of us, that's how that discomfort comes out, right? The discomfort comes out as being an imposter, and that's how we practice that discomfort, or we experience it. And so just kind of noting like, yeah, this is probably that discomfort because I'm doing something new, or I'm trying something big, and just being okay with that, because that's the cost to doing business. And just know like there's a cost no matter what you do. If you try for big things or you don't, like one is about regret and one is about discomfort, but both are going to have consequences. And so just saying like, yeah, I kind of feel like an imposter, but what are the facts? What are other people saying? Now, if you have, 20 or 30 people in your life saying you're an imposter, like probably pay attention to that. But oftentimes that is not the case. Let's see. How do I get my partner to engage in fixing a relationship rather than running away? Invite them, but you don't have to make a hard sale with them. If they are not willing to do the work or try to fix the relationship, that's really something they have to work through. That's not really something you're going to convince them of. I think sometimes we get in this place where we kind of figure out a strategy to like solve things, and then we say if they would only follow my strategy, it would be better. And so my job now is to sell you on participating in my strategy, because if you do it, things are going to be better. But the problem is like, why are you selling them so hard to do that? Because that's probably a sign that this isn't quite where you need to be. And so I think what I would do is I would demonstrate and discuss why I think it's a good idea. I think I might refer to some literature that talks about why that might be helpful. And then I think I would just invite them, and I would give them the freedom of choice. If it's about going to counseling or doing something like that, I might say like, hey, you can pick the person. So I'd give them some ability to decide about options, and then it would just be that. It would be an invitation. And I would note if it is not okay that they don't, I would tell them that. I just say like, hey, love you. I think we're having some real problems here, and I want to fix the relationship. And so whether you do or don't, just recognize like, I think we should, and that's important to me. Okay. What do we do if we have different sex drives? This is often the case. As you might guess, people rarely have the exact same sex drive. It would be totally awesome. I think I would have a lot less clients, and that would be sort of a bummer for me and my mortgage. But just practically speaking, it would be cool. But again, not usually the case. So here's the deal. There are 5 or 6, depending on who you want to talk to and argue with, different types of intimacy, and the physical sexual piece is just one of them. And so oftentimes what happens is that one person is more aligned with the physical sexual piece, and the other is more aligned with something like experiential intimacy or emotional intimacy. And so it's not that they don't want intimacy, but they don't necessarily appreciate your kind as much as you do. And so what we need to do is better understand the kind that they do appreciate and make sure that we're meeting them in that place first. And oftentimes what helps is that if we're meeting them in their desired type of intimacy, the other piece usually works itself out. And so we just have to have a conversation about, okay, if this particular blend of intimacy isn't as meaningful to you, then what is? So we can do that. And when we're doing that, oftentimes the other piece falls into place too. Let's see. Okay. Do you have or want a pet? We'll go with a fun one. Love pets. Don't have pets, but I love pets. I'm a dog person, but I went to the cat cafe with my daughter, and it kind of convinced me. I had allergies for a little while after that, but I still think I love cats too. So my answer quickly to that one is probably both. Moving on, some people asked here, how do you stop feeling guilty about taking distance if someone isn't good for your mental health? So if someone is not healthy in your life, or you have a really hard time interacting with them without it kind of getting on you and affecting your life, how do you do that without feeling guilty? And I think what I would tell you is that you just keep inviting them to follow the boundary. So the thing is like my door is often open to anyone but they have to kind of adhere to the boundaries. And so how I avoid feeling too guilty is to say, like, I'm actually not closing the door to you. It just has to be this way. And so if you're willing to do it this way, like, you're always welcome. But if you're not, then you're not. And that's more about your decision about that than mine, because this is just kind of what it takes. And so I think for me, at least, I go like, yeah, the door's open to you, but this is what it's going to look like. And you get to decide if you're willing or not. And if you're not, I get it. I might be disappointed about that or have some grief, but I will do my best to accept that. But just know that door is open if we can stick to this boundary. Let's see. I'm going to maybe do one more question here, and then I'm just going to give you a heads up. I will answer 2 or 3 questions that you type in. So if you have a question and it's a quick one, put it in, and I will try to answer it before we close, or at least the first 3 if I can. The last question I'm going to answer off all my sheets here would be, and I like this one, I thought about this one actually for a long time. How do I accept a father who I truly despise? And I really feel for whoever wrote this, because that's a tough spot to be in. And I'm not quite sure why it is that they despise them or what that's about. But I think acceptance is different than agreement. And acceptance is different than justification, or acceptance is different than forgiveness. I think how we practice acceptance around someone that we don't agree with is to just kind of say what's true about the situation. This person is my father. That might be it. That might be like as far as you can go down the line with that, is that they are, in fact, your parent. And that's it. And so we try to accept what we can and leave what we can't. And what we can accept, again, might be very, very limited, but we try to accept that and then leave the rest. And that's not to say we ignore the rest. We just say, like, that's as much as I can give, is this person is in fact my father. And I accept that part. All this other stuff, I don't know about that. That's not really my deal, but I accept this part. Okay, let me jump in and go, okay, someone said, how do you discipline your child? I think part of this is understanding what type of child you have, and how your child kind of responds best to discipline or to guidance and things like that. A book that was really helpful for me is reading about strong-willed children, which I basically was like looking in a mirror and like, okay, well, I guess this is actually a book about me, so good to know. But doing that and understanding kind of like what underpins the kiddo's emotions and what they want, how they work, allows us to kind of meet them where they're at. And so the thing is that oftentimes when we meet them where they're at, there's actually a lot less discipline required. And so I would tell you to kind of engage in a process of just really trying to understand your kiddo, where they're coming from, kind of what that psychology and personality style is like for them. And then how do you meet them there and kind of tailor it to them? Because every kid's different, right? And so I think if we have just like it's this way or nothing, unfortunately, we're going to probably cut somebody out, or we're going to do something that's not so helpful for someone. And so I think it's important to kind of tailor it to the kiddo. Someone said, any recommendations for self-help books? Yes. If you want to email me, I will send you a list, because I have a list, and that will answer that. Someone said, hello. I always like to hear this is helpful to people, so that's great. I'm glad to be helpful. Is it possible to heal from emotional abuse and maintain the marriage? Yes, but that's going to be really reliant on their willingness to make that right, and their willingness to take responsibility and to do things differently. Again, I know I had talked a little bit about some betrayal stuff too. They can't just say like, hey, you got to just get over it. Like if that's our response to things, that's not going to work. So yes, it is possible, but we have to meet the person where they're at. And you don't just say like, hey, get over it and that'll make this better. So that would be my answer to that. Okay, I'll answer this one and then I'll probably close after that. So how can I let go of someone who ghosted me? I'm still attached and I want no contact, but I'm emotionally involved. This is a tricky one, especially if you got some anxious attachment. Again, I know nothing about that, but for us to be ghosted is, man, what do we do with that, right? We just kind of need some sense of like, am I okay? And being ghosted doesn't give us that. And so, first of all, I feel for you in that space. Secondly, chasing after that person is not going to be the way to make this work, right? And eventually, they're either going to stop responding and then you're right back in the spot, or if you've been ghosted, they just won't respond, period. And their lack of response will only make this worse. And so I think how I would approach this is if I were ghosted, this is going to sound therapist-like, but I think literally what I would do is I might journal what I'd want to say to them. And not send it, but journal what I want to say to them about the relationship and how I'm feeling, and then not send it. And so every time that I felt like I needed to reach out, I think I would journal that, and I think I would just reflect on what's coming up. Because there's a wound there, so I'd want to understand, like, what is the wound? Is it that the way you ghosted me makes me feel unlovable, or I thought we had potential, or I thought we really were connecting and I was wrong? Like, I want to understand that, but I would probably do it through writing that out. So I might say, like, hey, person, whatever their name is, probably not person, but hey, person, this is kind of where I'm at today. I'm wondering why you did this, because, and I think walking that out and processing it will help, because what I know is the more that we can kind of own how we're feeling, and get connected with that and give ourselves some time, that need to reach out or that need to know or have a why becomes much less important as we get kind of healthier and clearer about what we're thinking and feeling. Okay, that is what I have for today. Again, I think I said last time, I'm going to try to do this every week as long as people want it. So if I get a lot of messages that say, please stop doing this, then I will stop. But until then, I'm going to try to do this weekly and answer your questions. If you have been attending these and you're like, hey, I've got an idea, or I think you should structure it this way, I'm super open to that, because again, I want to make this as helpful as possible. So if you've got like the perfect plan or strategy, please share that with me. Again, if you missed it at the beginning and I didn't get to your question, because I got a lot of them, which that was awesome. So I got a lot of them, I'll save these. But if I didn't get to it and you want to reel about it, DM me the word real and then put the question. If you bought a badge today, I saw some more people do that. That's super cool. I only wish I could wear them, because I think this would be awesome. I could like wear all the badges, but I don't think that's possible. The other thing is, a lot of how I've gotten here today is that I've just kept being curious about how to get better at this stuff. And so what I would tell you is that you can do that too. So there are a lot of people who do what I do and are brilliant, and some probably more wise than I am, for sure more wise than I am, that can help you too. And so what I want to encourage you to do is subscribe to the newsletters, listen to the podcasts, do the lives. Like, if you're doing this with me, keep doing it, keep going at it, and then you'll learn over time what works for you. About that, I have a newsletter. So if you're interested in getting that, what I'm trying to do there is just kind of dig a little deeper into some of these questions. This week, I'll tell you guys, because you're here, it's going to be about how we need to change our responses based on our relationship. Because some of us come from a place in our life of trauma or chaos or abuse, and we learn these patterns of responding that aren't actually helpful to a healthy relationship. And so we got to update that. So if that's at all of interest to you on how you might do that or help a partner do it, you might want to sign up for the newsletter. And then lastly, some of the questions that I get are about courses that I have. I've been trying to do some kind of easy entry courses for people. And so if that's of interest, you can check it out. Okay, that's all that stuff.